Hello guys, and welcome to another episode where we explore the truths they don't want you to know. Today we're going to talk about something that affects every single American, whether you realize it or not, the so-called strong dollar and why it's actually a carefully constructed trap for ordinary people. Before we dive in, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop it in the comments below. And if you appreciate someone finally telling you the truth about these economic sleights of hand, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. The more of US who band together, the harder it becomes for them to keep pulling the wool over our eyes. Now, let's talk about what they call a strong dollar. You've heard the politicians and financial experts celebrate it like it's some kind of national victory. The dollar is strong against foreign currencies, they proclaim, as if this is automatically good news for you and your family. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself, who benefits when the dollar strengthens? Is it the factory worker in Michigan, the farmer in Iowa, the small business owner in Tennessee, or is it someone else entirely? The truth is, the concept of a strong dollar is perhaps one of the most brilliant deceptions ever perpetrated on the American public. It sounds patriotic, doesn't it? Who wouldn't want a strong dollar? It appeals to our national pride. But this linguistic trick masks a devastating reality for working Americans while enriching a small group of financial elites. Tonight, we're going to follow the money and reveal exactly how this trap works, who set it, and why it's keeping you from the prosperity you deserve. When financial experts talk about a strong dollar, what they're really describing is your currency buying more of other countries' currencies. Sounds good on the surface, right? But let's think about what this actually means in practice. A strong dollar means American products become more expensive for foreign buyers. When a factory in Ohio tries to sell machinery overseas, the foreign buyer now has to spend more of their currency to get the same number of dollars to pay for that machinery. The result? They often choose to buy from somewhere else, somewhere cheaper. Meanwhile, foreign products become cheaper for Americans. That big box store filled with products made in China? Those prices drop when the dollar strengthens. Again, sounds beneficial until you realize what's happening. American manufacturing can't compete. American jobs disappear. American communities hollow out. This isn't some unfortunate side effect. It's by design. The global financial elite have constructed a system where American workers are sacrificed on the altar of cheap foreign goods. They've convinced you that being able to buy more cheap plastic trinkets from overseas is somehow more important than having a well-paying job manufacturing real products here at home. And who benefits from this arrangement? The multinational corporations who have moved their production overseas. The Wall Street investors who make billions on the international currency markets. The politicians who receive generous campaign contributions from both. None of them live in the communities devastated by factory closures. None of them send their children to the schools that lose funding when the local tax base evaporates. The strong dollar isn't a sign of American economic health. It's a weapon being used against everyday Americans in a class war that most people don't even realize is being waged. To understand how we got here, we need to look back at a pivotal moment in American economic history. After World War II, the United States emerged as the world's dominant economic power. Our manufacturing base was unmatched, and the dollar became the world's reserve currency under the Bretton Woods system, backed by gold. During this period, a strong dollar actually did benefit Americans because we were the world's manufacturer. We made things, real things, and sold them everywhere. A factory worker could support a family on one income, buy a home, own a car, take vacations, and send his kids to college. That was the America that many of us remember, or that our parents and grandparents told us about. But then came the great betrayal. In 1971, President Nixon took us off the gold standard entirely. This untethered the dollar from any physical reality and placed its value entirely in the hands of financial manipulators. Then, throughout the 1980s and especially the 1990s, our leadership class, both Republicans and Democrats, embraced globalization with religious fervor. They sold us on free trade agreements that weren't free or fair. They opened our markets while allowing other countries to protect theirs. They celebrated as American companies shipped jobs overseas, calling it economic efficiency, while communities across America's heartland began their descent into despair and addiction. strong dollar policy became a tool in this transformation. By keeping the dollar artificially high, they ensured foreign goods would always undercut American-made products. They promised this would lead to a new economy where Americans would do the knowledge work, while other countries did the manufacturing. But they never answered a simple question. What about the millions of Americans who built things with their hands? What happens to them in this brave new world? The answer, as we now know, was nothing good. They were left behind, their skills devalued, their communities crumbling, their futures stolen, all while being told that the strong dollar represented American success. Let's talk about who actually benefits when the dollar strengthens, because it certainly isn't most Americans. The primary beneficiaries form a small but powerful ecosystem of interests that have hijacked our economy for their own gain. First, there are the international banks and financial institutions that make billions trading currencies and exploiting the differences in international markets. When the dollar fluctuates against other currencies, these firms don't just observe the changes. They actively bet on them, manipulate them, and profit enormously regardless of which direction things move. For them, volatility isn't a bug, it's a feature. Then there are the multinational corporations that have built their business models around cheap foreign labor. They manufacture products for pennies overseas and sell them at substantial markups here at home. A strong dollar increases their profit margins by making those foreign operations even cheaper. Have you noticed that even as the dollar strengthened over various periods, the savings rarely seem to make it to you, the consumer? The corporations pocket the difference. The political and media establishment benefits too. Politicians receive campaign contributions from these banks and corporations, while many media companies are owned by the same financial interests. Is it any wonder they frame a strong dollar as an unalloyed good, rather than questioning who really profits? And let's not forget foreign governments, particularly China, which has manipulated its currency for decades to maintain an export advantage while buying up American debt. This symbiotic relationship serves China's geopolitical ambitions and enriches America's financial elite, all at the expense of the American worker. This isn't conspiracy theory, it's simply following the money. The strong dollar doesn't just happen. It's maintained through policy choices that consistently favor these interests over those of ordinary Americans. And they've been remarkably successful at convincing many Americans to cheer for policies that are actively harming them. When we talk about who pays the price for the strong dollar policy, we're really talking about the geography of economic destruction. Look at a map of America and you'll see that the costs aren't distributed equally across our nation. Coastal metropolitan areas, dominated by finance, technology, and services, can often benefit from aspects of dollar strength. The finance bros in Manhattan who trade international currencies, the tech executives in Silicon Valley whose companies manufacture their gadgets in China, the corporate lawyers and consultants who structure offshore operations, they're doing just fine. But drive through the small and medium-sized towns across Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, once the industrial backbone of the greatest economy the world has ever known. What do you see now? Shuttered factories, boarded-up main streets, communities struggling with unemployment, drug addiction, and despair. This isn't some natural economic evolution. It's the direct result of policy choices, including the maintenance of an artificially strong dollar that makes American manufacturing uncompetitive. The strong dollar policy has been nothing less than a massive wealth transfer from middle America to the coastal elites and foreign manufacturers. And the political class has the audacity to wonder why there's so much anger in the heartland. They can't understand why people who have watched their livelihoods, communities, and futures systematically dismantled might be upset about it. They dismiss these Americans as backward or clinging to the past, when they're simply asking for the same opportunity their parents had to work hard at a decent job and build a good life. The strong dollar isn't just an economic policy. It's a geographic redistribution of prosperity, systematically stripping wealth from the middle of the country and concentrating it on the coasts and overseas. And when the victims of this policy speak up, they're told they just need more education or should learn to code. As if a 55-year-old former steelworker should abandon his community, family, and identity to chase jobs created specifically for a different class of Americans. Here's something they don't teach in economics class. A strong dollar policy deliberately creates debt dependence, both for nations and for individual Americans. It's not a bug in the system. It's a feature designed to keep you financially shackled. On the international level, developing countries often borrow in dollars because it's the world's reserve currency. When the dollar strengthens, their debt effectively increases, forcing them to extract more resources, exploit their workers even more ruthlessly, and remain subservient to international financial institutions controlled by, you guessed it, the same elite interests pushing the strong dollar policy. But the same trap operates here at home. As American manufacturing has been hollowed out by the effects of the strong dollar, many Americans have been forced to take on increasing levels of debt just to maintain their standard of living. Credit cards, student loans, auto loans, mortgages, the average American now lives under a mountain of debt that would have been unimaginable 2 generations ago. This isn't an accident. When you can't earn enough from productive work because those jobs have been shipped overseas, you're left with 2 choices. Accept a dramatically lower standard of living or borrow. Most choose the latter, creating a population of debt servants who spend their lives working not to build wealth but simply to pay interest to the very financial institutions that helped eliminate their well-paying jobs in the first place. The financial elite understands something fundamental. Controlling debt means controlling people. Indebted citizens are less likely to risk their job by speaking out, organizing, or challenging the status quo. They're too busy trying to make their next payment to question why the system is structured as it is. And the politicians enable this trap, celebrating low interest rates that make borrowing easier while doing nothing to address the fundamental problem. Americans simply don't earn enough anymore from productive work. They've replaced good salaries with easy credit and called it progress. But debt isn't prosperity. It's a claim on your future labor, a form of bondage dressed up as opportunity. The strong dollar helps maintain this system by continuing to undermine American productive capacity while creating the illusion of prosperity through cheap imported goods bought on credit. Beyond its economic impact, the strong dollar serves another purpose for the establishment. It's a geopolitical weapon. The United States has increasingly used the dollar's dominant position in the global financial system to impose its will on other nations through sanctions and financial restrictions. When we sanction a country, we're essentially telling them they can't participate in the dollar-based financial system. For many nations, this is economically devastating. And while there are certainly cases where this power has been used against genuine bad actors, it's also been wielded against nations that simply refuse to comply with the agenda of America's ruling class. But there's a problem with using any weapon too frequently. Eventually, your targets develop countermeasures. We're now seeing an accelerating move away from dollar dependence by countries around the world. Russia, China, Iran, Brazil, and others are creating alternative payment systems that bypass the dollar entirely. They're increasing their gold reserves. They're conducting bilateral trade in their own currencies. The establishment media barely reports on this seismic shift, but it represents a direct threat to America's position in the world. If the dollar loses its status as the world's primary reserve currency, the consequences for ordinary Americans will be severe. The artificial support for our currency that has allowed the government to run massive deficits while keeping inflation relatively contained will disappear. When that happens, the bill for decades of fiscal mismanagement will come due. And guess who will be expected to pay it? Not the financial elites who benefited from this system and are already positioning themselves for the dollar's decline. No, it will be regular Americans who will face skyrocketing prices for essential goods, higher taxes, and reduced government services. The strong dollar policy, while presented as a sign of American economic might, is actually undermining our long-term economic sovereignty. It's sacrificing our industrial base and the well-being of our citizens for short-term financial and geopolitical advantages that primarily benefit the elite. And as more countries develop alternatives to the dollar system, the foundation of this strategy is eroding beneath our feet. One of the most insidious aspects of the strong dollar trap is how it masks the true state of inflation in America. We're told that inflation is under control, running at just a few percentage points annually. But any American who buys groceries, pays rent, or handles household bills knows the truth. The cost of living is skyrocketing in ways that aren't fully captured by official statistics. How does the strong dollar play into this deception? When cheap foreign goods flood our markets thanks to dollar strength, it artificially suppresses the price of many consumer products. This allows the government to claim that inflation is lower than it actually is, because their statistics heavily weight these imported goods. But here's what they're not telling you. The things that matter most to American families: housing, healthcare, education, childcare aren't imported. They're domestic services that have seen explosive price increases. A cheap television from China doesn't help you when your rent has doubled, your healthcare premiums have tripled, and sending your child to college costs as much as buying a house did for your parents. The strong dollar creates a statistical mirage that allows policymakers to claim economic success while everyday Americans watch their purchasing power erode in the areas that matter most. It's gaslighting on a national scale. And there's another layer to this deception. When the Federal Reserve creates trillions of new dollars out of thin air, as it has done repeatedly in recent years through quantitative easing and other mechanisms, it devalues every dollar in existence. This is inflation in its most fundamental form, more dollars chasing the same amount of goods and services. But because much of this newly created money flows into financial assets rather than the real economy, and because dollar strength keeps imported goods cheap, the inflation doesn't show up where economists are trained to look for it. Instead, it manifests as asset bubbles in stocks, bonds, real estate, and other investments primarily owned by the wealthy. The result? The rich get richer as their assets appreciate, while everyday Americans face steadily rising costs for essentials without corresponding wage increases. It's a transfer of wealth from the middle and working classes to the financial elite, disguised by the smokescreen of a strong dollar and low inflation. What we're experiencing in America today is a form of financial colonialism, where a small elite extracts wealth from the productive class through increasingly sophisticated mechanisms. The strong dollar policy is one of their most effective tools, creating the illusion of prosperity while actually facilitating this extraction. This isn't so different from how traditional colonialism operated. The colonial power would extract resources from the colony while selling manufactured goods back to the colonized people, keeping them dependent and impoverished. Today, our financial and political elites have simply turned much of America into an internal colony, extracted from and exploited for the benefit of those at the top. So how do we break free from this system? First, we need to recognize it for what it is. The strong dollar isn't a sign of American economic health. It's a mechanism for wealth extraction that benefits the few at the expense of the many. Second, we need to rebuild America's productive capacity. This means policies that explicitly prioritize American manufacturing, American workers, and American communities over abstract notions of global efficiency that somehow always seem to benefit the same small group of financial elites. Third, we need to reclaim control of our monetary policy from the Federal Reserve, an institution that consistently serves the interests of the banking sector rather than the American people. The Fed's dual mandate is supposedly price stability and maximum employment, but its actual record reveals a clear preference for keeping asset prices high even at the cost of American jobs. Fourth, we need to address the grotesque financialization of our economy, where making things has been replaced by moving money around as the primary driver of growth. When financial engineering creates more wealth than actual engineering, something has gone deeply wrong. Finally, we need leaders who actually represent the interests of the American people rather than those of multinational corporations, international banks, and foreign interests. Leaders who understand that a nation's strength comes not from the abstract value of its currency, but from the prosperity and security of its citizens. Breaking free won't be easy. The beneficiaries of the current system will fight viciously to preserve their advantages. They'll call any challenge to their power populism or protectionism or nationalism, as if prioritizing the well-being of your own citizens is somehow a radical position rather than the basic duty of any government. Let's talk about something fundamental that gets lost in all the economic jargon. A nation's currency is an expression of its sovereignty. When we allow our dollar to be manipulated for the benefit of international interests rather than the American people, we're surrendering a piece of that sovereignty. Throughout history, control over currency has been recognized as a core power of independent nations. It's why one of the first acts of the American government after the revolution was establishing our own currency. It's why European nations gave up the franc, Deutschmark, and lira only after intense debate about what adopting the euro would mean for their national sovereignty. Today, Decisions about the dollar are made primarily by unelected officials at the Federal Reserve, an institution that operates with remarkable independence from democratic oversight. The Fed's deliberations happen behind closed doors, and its actions often seem more responsive to the needs of international financial markets than to the concerns of ordinary Americans. This arrangement might make sense if the Fed had an unblemished record of serving the American national interest. But its actual history includes decisions that have triggered recessions, widened inequality, and facilitated the offshoring of American industry, all while ensuring that the financial sector remains protected and profitable. When the Fed pursues policies that maintain dollar strength at the expense of American manufacturing, it's making a choice about whose interests matter. When it floods financial markets with liquidity while Americans struggle with stagnant wages, it's declaring its priorities. And when it coordinates its actions with foreign central banks with minimal transparency, it raises serious questions about whose agenda is being served. A truly sovereign America would manage its currency primarily for the benefit of its citizens. It would recognize that while international financial interests are important, they cannot be allowed to override the fundamental needs of the American people for stable employment, affordable housing, and the opportunity to build wealth through productive work rather than financial speculation. Reclaiming monetary sovereignty doesn't mean isolationism or economic nationalism in its crudest form. It simply means insisting that American policy be made primarily for the benefit of Americans, not for an international financial class that feels no particular allegiance to any nation or community. It's time to envision what a post-strong dollar America could look like, an America where economic policy serves the many rather than the few, where prosperity is broadly shared, and where financial security isn't a luxury reserved for the elite. Imagine an America where manufacturing has returned to our shores, not just in high-tech industries but across the spectrum of production, where small and medium-sized towns once again have economic anchors that provide stable, well-paying jobs, where young people don't have to leave their communities to find opportunity. Imagine an America where the financial sector serves the real economy rather than dominating it, where banks facilitate productive investment rather than speculative trading, where success is measured by how many Americans can afford homes, healthcare, and education rather than by stock market indices. Imagine an America where monetary policy aims at stable prices and full employment for American workers, not at accommodating international financial flows or maintaining artificial currency values that benefit importers at the expense of domestic producers. This isn't a radical vision. In fact, it's closer to the America that existed in the decades after World War II, a period of unprecedented prosperity and opportunity for ordinary citizens, than to the financialized, hollowed-out economy we have today. Achieving this vision will require breaking the strong dollar trap and challenging the interests that benefit from it. It will mean embracing policies that explicitly prioritize the well-being of American workers and communities over abstract notions of economic efficiency that serve primarily to justify offshoring and wage suppression. It will require political courage and a willingness to challenge powerful interests. But the alternative is continuing down our current path, a path that leads to an America increasingly divided between a wealthy financial elite and a struggling majority, between thriving coastal enclaves and declining interior regions. The strong dollar has been a trap, a clever way of disguising the extraction of wealth from working Americans. Breaking free from that trap is the first step toward building an economy that works not just for the financial class but for all Americans. The choice is ours. We can continue to celebrate a strong dollar while watching our country grow weaker, or we can reclaim our economic sovereignty and build a truly strong America, one measured not by the international value of our currency but by the security, prosperity, and dignity of our people. Thank you for watching. If this message resonated with you, share it with someone you know who's been affected by these policies. The first step toward change is understanding what's really happening.